seems like forever, and we still haven't written any code yet, but we're getting set up. I'm going to add a couple of more little things, and then we'll be ready to go. So I can do this here by create empty, or I can add game object. By the way, just about everything that we've seen so far is a quote-unquote game object, and we're going to see what that means pretty soon. So I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to call this main. You may create others that suit you. I'm also going to create another empty object. And you can see it comes up by default as game object. And I'm going to call this one button handler. Okay. Now I could have included the button handler in main. There's no reason not to for a project this tiny, but when you start working with design and stuff, it's good to encapsulate things. As a matter of fact, I've seen some people make it where each button has its own handler. Naming can get a little complicated then, but if you have a lot of buttons to deal with, a lot of controls, that's not necessarily a bad idea, or at least grouping them into different things. But basically what these empty objects, game objects, are for is they're going to give us a place to put our scripts. Okay, and we really need something like that. So we're going to set that up, our button handler. And the way to do that, so there's a couple of ways we can create a script. First one we can do is come over here. You see I clicked on button handler. I got its thing up there, the transform. Who cares where this is because it's invisible. It's not going to show up. But if you really wanted to be, anal about it, you can click reset and put it at 0. Again, you can't see the button handler, but we can add a component to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a new script. Okay, and we can give that script a name. In this case, button handler. Okay, nothing wrong with having the name of the script be the same as the name of the object. So we're just going to take that, and then what I'm going to do, if it'll let me, is I'm going to drag that button handler over into scripts. I want to keep all my scripts together, and it automatically repointed, so it does the refactoring for me of, that script moved. I'll put it, we'll point to it in a different folder. So it did that very nicely for us. Okay. The other way is I could go right into scripts and right click and say create C# script. Okay. And this one will be main. Oops, if I can spell. And there we go. And now we're ready to start writing these scripts. Well, actually, they're already written, sort of. If you look over here in the inspector, you can see that it already has some code in there. But it's basically empty, and it's just a template. Okay. If you want to edit it, you can double-click on them or right-click and say open. Okay. But I'm just going to double-click now, and it should bring up Visual Studio. Okay, Microsoft Visual Studio opens that up. And there is our script that is written so far with nothing much. Okay, all game objects are class mono behavior, and so the main has to match for game objects, the name of the file has to match the name of the class. So main.cs has class main, and by default it puts in start and update. Start fires when the object is instantiated or created. Okay, and then update is called once per frame, and Unity generally runs at a frame rate of about 60 per or better depending on your performance. So you can think of that as really fast updates. So whatever goes in update should be really quickly dealt with. Okay. In our case, we don't need either of these, and so we can remove them or leave them in there since they're empty. Purists would say remove them because they do have an overhead in the code, but your code will run if you leave them in there, and who knows, maybe later on you'll need them. Okay. So anyway, there is your empty, ready to write code. Now, by way of demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of variables that we don't need and a couple of variables that we do. And so bear with me on this. This is private int sum var. Okay. Whoops. Cannot type today. Okay, so those two are just throwaways just to show you the difference between what happens when you use private and public and the way that it works with the Unity editor. And now I'm going to create a couple that we do need. So here we go. Actually, I'm going to create 3, and they're all going to be public. Public game object. Okay. Game object is an overall class, so even things that are subclassed from it are still game objects. And in this case, what I'm going to use it for, as you'll see, makes it reasonable to call this way. So button toggle text. Okay. So again, the name that we gave our objects is kind of important here. Okay. Public game object button enable toggle. Okay. If you haven't used C# before, it's very much like C, requires semicolons at the end of the statements, this kind of thing. Easy things to forget. Okay, here's the other one, public. And this one I had to get from the documentation. And this is why it's important for you to be able to look up documentation as well. Okay, it is text mesh pro UGUI. And that's the type of TextMesh Pro text, and this is text main. Okay, so the reason I declared those public is now I can refer to those things, and they're public because, well, actually you'll see why later on, but giving them the name does help me locate them and know what they're for. And so that's what we're going to use to actually access those game objects. Okay. And this is here will be an example of exactly how that works. So I don't really need anything in start, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call button toggle text dot set active false. Okay, semicolon. And so now I've got a script that will run, and at the beginning when it runs, it is going to set the button toggle text, that button to be inactive, and we'll see what that does. Okay, but I'm able to refer to it now, and I will go ahead and file and save, and then these Visual Studio and the Unity Editor coordinate with each other. So when I click back to the Unity Editor, first thing it does is says, oh, you've changed scripts. I'll recompile them. Okay. Oop. It says, oh, there's a problem. Okay. The type or namespace tech. Aha. I left something out. Oh, yes, I did. Okay. So I'll just go back to my Unity editor. Okay. So you get good at reading these things. So let's see this one here. And figuring out what it is you left out. So we have collections, collection generic, Unity engine, using Unity engine UI. That's always important. But more to the point, what it was missing was using TM Pro, okay, which is the definitions for all the TextMesh Pro stuff. And I knew that and forgot it. And so again, when you see an editor message like that, you have to start getting used to interpreting them because you will make mistakes. And so it's not just enough to know how to do stuff. You also need to know how to correct your mistakes. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save this again. Click over in this. It'll recompile. Now what is it complaining about? Cannot convert from string to bool. What did I do? I can guess. I let the editor fool me. Sure enough, false is not a string. Silly me. Okay, so got that. Save. Come back over here. Is it happy? Yes, it's happy. No errors that time. So I can now run this thing, and of course, if it's running the way it should disable that button or set it inactive. But I can tell you that it's not. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and run. So I hit play. And so it's going to sit there and say, okay, I'm going to start this thing up. It's started. Now I can actually click. You can see that the button shows that I'm clicking on them and stuff, but nothing disabled. Okay, let's fix that little problem. So I'll go ahead and stop this, and I'll go to main. Okay. And main doesn't have that script yet, so I could add that script, but it's just going to try and create a new script. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to drop main in there. Okay. And when I do, main now becomes the main script, and it'll run. But that's not enough because it'll run, but it won't actually connect to anything because look at what we got. I have another var. Let me bring up the code just so you can see this. Okay, another var, which is public, and so its value can be set here in the inspector. Okay, remember, another var will show in the inspector. Some var doesn't show up because it's private, and so it doesn't show up. But I also named 3 objects, and so I need to get those in there. And there's a couple ways you can do it. You can click on this, okay, that little circular button. You can click on that, and it'll give you a list of the assets that it knows about, and you can select which one that is. So let's see, button toggle text. So that would be button toggle text. Okay. And you see now that it is in that field. Button enable toggle. Okay. The other way you can do that is you can actually drag them from wherever you spot them into here. So if it was a script that it was looking for, you could drag a script in there. If it was a game object out of your scene, you can drag that in there. Text main, there's that one, and I can drag that in there. Okay. Now this is set up so that it should, when I run this, it should inactivate that button. I'm going to go ahead and save the scene. Okay. And it wants to know what I want to call it. And I'll just call this beginner. Okay. So instead of the default scene, now it has a name. And I'll go ahead and run it now that it's saved. And the button disappeared. Okay. So the script ran. What setActive does is it lets you know whether a particular thing is active or not. If I go over here and I highlight here's that button toggle text. If I highlight it, okay, it's not active. It's unchecked up here. And if I want to see it again, I'll have to recheck it or stop this. And now you see that it's checked again, because while it's not running, of course, you want to be able to see stuff. Okay. I could have preset it to inactive. Okay. But I just used start to do the same thing, so that when start fired off, it set that button inactive and it disappeared. You can do that to hide things in your user interface, and you can also use that to bring things back. Okay. All right. So we've learned a little bit now. I just want to reiterate these, and then we're going to stop and do another video because we all need a break. Okay. So a few things. Private things don't show up in the inspector. Public things do. Public things that are in our user interface can actually be associated with those, okay, which was very nice. So if I go back to main and look at the script, I can associate things that are in that script with actual things, actual objects that are in my scene. So that's very handy. And start fires when the object is instantiated. Update fires on frames, and we don't have a use for that just yet. And so when we come back, we're going to write some actual code that will use the toggle button to toggle some text, and use the enable button to enable the thing. And we're also going to see how to disable the button without making it disappear, because that's what we really wanted to do. I didn't really want to make it go away, but there are times when you do want to make part of your UI invisible for part of the time. And so setActive and setActive false or setActive true are good ways to turn parts of your user interface on and off, and I wanted you to see that. Okay, we'll come back next time and we will talk about how to actually make a button work.